Hi there, folks, and welcome to this episode of Michael's Backyard Marina. To my right, you see there's a hood up. I got a couple more pieces of maintenance type work I want to do on this Lexus RX 330. This is a 15-year-old vehicle, has just over 98,000 miles on it. It's in really good shape for its age. You can tell it's been probably garage kept most all its life. But it's time to do the timing belt. I'm not sure if most of you folks are familiar. Their cars either in their engines have timing belts or timing chains. Timing belts require a little more service more often than timing chains do. This one has a double overhead cam. It's got the VVT-I, so the variable valve timing. I think that's what it is, 3.3 liter V6. It's a very, very smooth running engine. And the last thing you want to do is have your belt break and destroy your engine, because it is an interference motor. If your belt breaks while you're driving, or even if the engine's idling, most likely it's going to damage the motor. Now, I did do some research. I've been reading different things from different people, and you guys feel free to comment down below. They claim that this should be changed at a 100,000 mile interval or every 5 years. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I hadn't heard the year thing before, but you guys leave comments below so I'll know when to put the next time I need to do this. Mark it on my little tag I'm going to put underneath the hood, or a paint pen I'm going to write down underneath the hood of when I need to do it again. This one has been serviced before, and it shows that it was done at 55,266 miles. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It kind of lends itself to me to believe that 5-year thing is somewhat true, because somebody had this car. Obviously, it's a very low mileage car for being 15 years old. I mean, if you put 10,000 miles a year on it, you'd have at least 150,000 miles on it, not 98,000. So it's a very low mileage car for the year. So that would tend to make me believe, okay, this was 55,000 miles. It was done. It had to be done, 5 to 7 years ago, maybe, halfway through its time frame. And chances are I probably wouldn't have to do it, but there's a lot of peace of mind knowing if my wife's taking this thing across country to visit the kids and whatnot, that I don't want it broken down on the side of the road because the timing belt went and I had the opportunity to fix it before it happened. So that's why I'm doing this today. Now, I am going to time it. This is going to be a timed event, so to speak. I'm going to set my stopwatch. We're going to take a quick look at the clock. And my goal is, can I get this done in under 3 hours? Maybe, maybe not. I've read things where people take anywhere from 3 to 8 hours to do a job like this. I don't know what it normally costs to do at the dealership. I don't take things to dealerships. I don't take things to mechanics. I do it all myself. And if it came right down to it, I'd pull an engine. I've done it before. I've rebuilt an engine and a couple of engines in cars before. Not afraid to do that. It's all depending on how deep. Do I want to get shin deep, knee deep, waist deep, neck deep into a car and tie up that much of my time working on a car or not. So I'm going to try to take you through step by step what I do to do this timing belt. I've never done one of these before. I'll be right up front and honest with you. This will be my first time through doing one of these things. It was the first time doing that doggone drive shaft or that wheel bearing on the rear wheel as well. So I hope I got all my bad luck out of the way on that wheel bearing, and this goes as smooth as possible. I've watched several videos of other people doing it. I'm trying to get you do as good a video as they did, or even better. My goal is always to try to do better, give you more detail. Not just the where, but the why I'm doing certain things in some cases. So let's take a look at the parts that I purchased, and then we're going to dive in and start taking this thing apart. And I'll show you step by step how I'm going to go back apart. And basically reverse is almost, or putting it back together is almost doing it in reverse, except with a couple of different key steps. Let's go over here to the bench and I'll show you some of my parts. So I bought an AC Delco kit out of rockauto.com. I'll leave a link below in the description as to which one I bought for this car. They seem to be a pretty reliable place to buy things from. I bought quite a bit of stuff from them. The delivery is pretty decent, and sometimes check your prices at your local place as well. Sometimes you don't save money going to Rock Auto, sometimes you do. So always double check your pricing at your local supply houses. Keep them happy as well. So I bought this kit. It was like $142. That included shipping. It comes with, looks like a floating idler. Looks like this goes on and possibly is pushed on by the tensioner. Comes with a new tensioner. Don't pull that pin until you're ready to until it's installed. We'll go over that. Looks like a nice idler bearing here for the belt. We got the good gasket. Now I've read it's the good metal gasket that has the rubber sealer around here that sits on your water pump, and it comes with a brand new water pump. They recommend replacing the water pump when you're doing this, because if your water pump goes bad 10,000 miles later, guess what? You're jumping back in and doing this all over again. And for the cost of all this, the water pump's pretty insignificant. Over here to the right, you can see that I purchased a brand new puller kit, because you got to pull the harmonic balancer off of this car, and I will be doing that today. And we'll see if this kit does what I want it to do. If it does, I'll leave this kit in the description down below, and you can purchase the same kit to do the same job yourself. The reason I bought a new one is that my kit that I currently have is missing this key piece here that lets it float around and not destroy. You put this on the tip, won't destroy the threads. Now this is dry. I put a little bit of lube on here myself, and that way this thing doesn't gall and lets it float as freely as possible while you're trying to pull out whatever pulley you're pulling out. So anyway, without further ado, let's get in and start getting this car up in the air a little bit so I can do what I need to do to it. First things first, we got to jack the car up and get the right front wheel off. With the wheel up in the air, we can now take the tire off. Okay, the next order of business is to take this cover off right here. Looks like it's held on by two 10mm. It takes a 10mm socket to take these bolts out. You got to remove this cover to gain access to the lower pulley. All right, by removing that cover, we've gained access to the lower pulley and the harmonic balancer. We'll get to the point here in a bit where we'll pull that pulley off by removing this bolt and putting a puller on here and sliding this straight off the crankshaft. Now we're going to go up top and start disassembling some things up top so we can gain access to the rest of the belt. Now it's my understanding that pretty much every bolt underneath here is going to be a 12, 14, or 16. They don't use any 13 or 15s. So we'll find out if that's true. So I'm going to go after this little bolt here first. And we got plenty of room to set things up here on top. We get that out of the way. And then I'm going to go after these two engine mount bolts. Some of these are going to take a little more horsepower. Looks like that whole motor mount comes out in one piece there then, which is nice. Okay, next thing we took out was the alternator bracket. That seems to be something I wanted out of my way, so I removed it. Alrighty folks, we're 2 hours and 18 seconds into this job so far, and I think I'm at the halfway point. I'm going to go over with you what I've done so far. Okay, as you saw, maybe you didn't see, you saw me impacting some pieces out of here. We've got several pieces we've taken out, piece by piece. You know, you saw the upper motor mount come out. We'll have to put that back in when it goes back together. We got a few long bolts here. Those came through this piece here. There's two of those. So kind of give you an idea of what I had to do to get where I'm at right now. So in order to pull the cover off, one of the covers you have to pull off is your top cover here. Now this covers the top pulleys in this area to keep all the dirt and debris off of them. This slips right in here like this. Wow, that actually went right back in there pretty quick. But as you can see here, there's 1, 2, this is holding a combination of the bottom cover and the top cover. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts on the top, 6 bolts on the top to take this cover off. When you take the bottom cover off first, this will be out of the way. This one gets trapped behind. So the bottom cover will go on after this cover is on. There is this assembly here that's on the outside of the water pump. You will need a special socket, and I'll tell you what that socket is in a second. It's a little, I don't know if that's a star socket or what it's called. I'll probably put a little thing in to flash up on the screen here to show you what that is and what size this was. But this goes in here. You have to back these 2 bolts out here, and there's not enough room to get them all the way out, so they have to stay inside this housing. And then you got to reach in and you back these 2 studs out, and these studs come out after you've already removed this style of nut. I almost dropped it. So this kind of nut here goes on the outside of this stud and tightens this up in place. So there's 4 of these holding this in place. And you can get these 3 out. And you go, well, where's that one at? Well, that one, whoops, I'm dropping stuff. That one there is behind this piece. Now this piece sits down on top of it. Let me see if I can get this back down here so you can see. So this piece is bolted down in there. This piece is on top of it. Get it in the right orientation here. Nope, I had it right the first time. Yeah. This goes on top like this. And it's going to take a little bit to get that wiggled loose. It feels like, hey, this thing's still tight even though I got these 2 tall bolts out of the way. Well, that has a pin and it's a little corroded and it's going to stick in there a little bit. I'm going to put this back together with a little never sees around there, because when I go to do the timing belt again in the future, either 5 years from now or whatnot, I will be able to get it apart. So that sits on top of there. Once you pull this out of the way, you gain access to this bolt head, and then you can pull this piece off. Once this piece is off, you can gain access to the things down deeper in here. Now let's go to the bottom side. So yes, we've pulled out the motor mount. We pulled this piece off. A couple of these other brackets off up here. Yeah, we pulled the motor mount off, this piece. A couple of upper brackets. There is a little piece I've tucked away that sits on top. It's got to go, this bolt just holds this little sensor or whatever it is. I have no idea what that is, but it holds, another bolt holds that in place. But then you got to make sure these little brackets here that hold the wiring harness in place, you can pull that back and these will slip up. And that's nice because it gets it up out of your way a little bit, so you can get, let me kind of pull that back out of my way here a little bit. There we go. So it allows you to gain access to this cover, and so then you can pull the cover off. It's kind of brutal. It's not a lot of area. As you take more stuff apart, the better it gets. Now, one of the hardest parts I had to get at was down on the alternator. To take the drive belt, so you got 2 belts. You've got your alternator / air conditioning belt that goes around the main pulley, and you got your power steering belt. Those have to come off. And I would suggest to go ahead and buy yourself some new ones, because if you're going to this much trouble to replace this timing belt, spend a couple more dollars, get you 2 new belts, because the last thing you want to do is get right back in here a couple months or a year later and realize I should have replaced those belts because they were getting kind of tired, or they're starting to squeak or chirp. And I noticed these were making just a little bit of a chirp noise, not much, but they were getting dry, so why not put them in. I'm now going to show you the tensioners, where they're located, and it might be kind of difficult to show you on the alternator because it's really buried in there, and my hands had a heck of a time getting this thing broke loose. Let me get down in there and show you. Now, there's one bolt right here on the alternator. you can see where the alternator is right here. I'm trying to hold the camera as steady as I can. There's a hole right there in the center of the light. That's where the bolt goes through. Now you come straight over here. Let's see if I can get it in picture here. There it is. There's a bolt head right there that you can see in the light. There's a bolt head right there on just to the right. It's in the very front of the car there, and toward the front of the car and the front of the alternator. There's a bolt there you have to back off. There is one to the side of it that I can't even get in the shot. Maybe I can. Try to get my finger in here to point. Right there is my fingertip. There's a bolt right there you got to back off. The other bolt right here that's in the darkness right now is the one that you have to, see if I can shed some light on it. That one there you have to back off, and that'll let the alternator drop down, and with that drop down you can actually get the belt off. That was a pain in the butt. That took quite a bit of time for me to do that. I bet I spent 15 minutes alone, maybe 20 minutes alone, just getting that alternator bolt backed up, just because it's such a tight spot to get into. I bought a tool yesterday that I'm hoping is going to help me make that job a lot easier to tighten it back up, and I'll show you what that is. All right, now we're down below by the crankshaft here. Got the crankshaft over here. You can see your belt going around the tensioner. There's your tensioner right here, and right back here is your power steering pump, tucked way back in there in Never Never Land. And there is a bracket that looks a lot like this. This is the bracket. This bolted right down here, and it had another bolt that went through here that tightened it up. I think that's always, this here is just a manual adjustment for tension when you put the belt back on. But you got to get that bolt and that bracket out of the way, because right here's your tensioner, and then you got to take this, and I presume you can go all the way up or all the way down. I'm not sure how far it will travel each way, but you got to gain access to a bolt that's right back here. There's one here, and there's one straight across from the other side of this cylinder piece here. And this will take your belt tensioner off. The other thing you'll need here is a 10mm Allen. I picked up one of those last night. I didn't have one. That's a 10mm hex wrench, or hex with a socket drive is what I did. You got to back this off to get this tensioner pulley out. And I haven't done that yet. And be aware there is a washer behind here that you want to make sure you get transferred to the other piece, because it spaces this pulley out in the right location. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back up top. So now let's talk timing marks. So I'm zoomed in here a little bit to try to get you some detail. I'm going to try to use my screwdriver as a pointer here. Right here on this casting, there's a little hump. It's very slight hump, not much there at all. Now I've taken my white paint pen and I've put a little mark right here. And on this little, behind this gear here, this pulley here, there is a little mark, detent right here on this little toothed piece that's behind this pulley. So you're going to crank this engine around until there's going to be 3 things you want to line up. Actually 4, depending on what belt you got. Now this belt I have here that was original, or I shouldn't say original, that was replaced, has absolutely no marks on the outside of it. So I actually took a paint pen. As you can see over here, there's a white mark on the belt, on the outside of the belt, and there's a white mark. There's a little dot right there on that gear there as well. I'll focus in on that in just a second. But what you're looking for is you want to make sure this dot here is lined up with this mark here. That's part 1. Part 2 is there'll be a little dot right here. Let me see if I can change my focus a little bit. It's very subtle, but there's a little detent mark on this pulley right there. Now I've painted that white as well, along with the white stripe I added to the belt. And I'll show you why I did that to the belt here in just a minute. And the other thing I did is I put the bolt back in after I pulled that harmonic balancer pulley off. I put this bolt back in so I could crank the motor over. And you want to crank it over clockwise. Now looking at so with those marks down below, like I just showed you, up top there's another little detent right here. And I've highlighted this one like there's a little detent. It's smooth around this whole face of this timing gear. And there's a detent right there. I put white paint on that. There's also a slight dent in your metal cover here, just a slight detent right there that you want to make sure is lined up straight across from here to here. That way, you know the timing marks are where they need to be here. So the front cam is timed with the crankshaft. And I also put a paint pen mark here on the belt. Now the paint pen's dry. I suggest using a paint pen because it will stay there better, and you let it dry for a little while. That way it doesn't get smeared off. And I'm going to show you why that's going to come in handy later on. Now that you can see that there's the white, this is on the front when you see my white mark here. Back here it's very difficult to see, and it's very hard to get this stuff out of the way so you can see. But there's, on the back pulley, there's the same kind of mark, the same kind of detent here, the same kind of mark in the case. And I also put a white stripe like this back here at that same timing mark. This will ensure that I get the new belt back on in the same spot with all the same timing, so I'm not off one tooth. So with that being said, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go ahead and take this tensioner pulley off. This will take all the tension off the belt. I'll be able to slide the belt off. Then we'll go after the water pump. The water pump will be next. And once we get the water pump out of the way, I'm going to get the water pump out and back in. We'll go after that bottom tensioner, and we'll get that bottom tensioner put back in place. And we'll slide the new belt on and be ready to and check the timing. And before we release the belt tensioner pin. Okay, I'm going to try to show you what to look for on your new timing belt. Nice thing is the new timing belt that came from Gates, which was in this AC Delco kit, has timing marks on the belt. If they didn't, you'd want to transfer timing marks from your current old belt, like this one didn't have any marks, to your new belt. And this looks like it may have had some kind of mark here at one time, but because the backside of the pulley, these idler pulleys run on some of the back sides of this, it might have worn it off. So what you can see here is I've lined up this mark and also the teeth. It's very important to have the teeth lined up. So now I have the teeth here where my white mark was in the groove of this pulley, or groove of this belt, lines up with this dotted mark here in the groove of that belt. And see these arrows that point up? That's for the front of the motor, which in this particular case would be the passenger side of the car, would be considered the front of the motor. And I'm going to hold this together and I'm going to swing it around, pull it through here, and I'm looking for my other timing mark. So now it's hard to see, but I've got this kind of pulled out tight here, both marks lined up, and this mark that I made on my belt lines up perfectly, and I actually put an arrow on here which shows the front of the motor here as well. This mark lines up, and I'm not only looking at the mark, but I'm looking at the groove in the pulley, lines up dead on. So then we're going to go to the back timing belt or timing gear, do the same thing. Now I couldn't get a good stripe on there because I could barely get to it with my paint pen, but it is right there's the groove, and right on this mark here is in the groove as well on the back side, not the tooth but in between teeth. So this belt matches up perfectly, so I with confidence now can put this belt on, line the timing marks, and all is happy with the world. Now this one here, the dotted one, is going to be on that little dot that we marked the belt on, and I'll show you that when I get back down in there, with the little white paint that's on the actual pulley itself, which is basically almost at, like, I don't know, it was almost at 3 o'clock position on that pulley. And so that will make this one go down there. This one up here will go on the front cam, and this would be on the back cam. Front cam, back cam. Anyway, just thought I better share that with you so you know what you're doing. All right, guys, I'm going to give you a little hint here. I've got the water pump in. This is the old water pump here. It's out. You're going to want to, there's two 10mm bolts that are on this tin that holds this cover, that supports the cover on the other side behind the pulleys. you're going to want to take 2 millimeter, God, I can't talk. It takes a 10 millimeter socket to take these two bolts off. You'll see them in the cover down here. And then you want to take your pry bar and you're going to go in behind this wiring harness and you're going to have to pry that cover out. Now, this is after you have this idler pulley pulled. What that'll do is it'll allow you enough room for this water pump to come out, because you'll have to kind of slide it out this way. And when you have to pry it back open, to slide this back up and under. And then you'll put your 5 bolts here, or 3 bolts here, and 3 nuts back on here with your new gasket in place, and tighten that down. So that's what I've got done so far, is I put that back in there with the gasket, then I reattach those 2 10 millimeter headed screws, bolts, back in there to hold that tin back. And then I went ahead and put my idler pulley back in place. Now, as you can see here, I've got my belt back on. And you're going to see that I have a couple of these paper clips. They come in handy. I put one here to hold the belt in place here. And I put another one down around the bottom to hold the belt around the bottom. And then I put one on the back pulley. Once I had the mark on top of the mark on the back pulley, I put another clip back there. That holds that all that in place while you go in and line up the bottom pulley. So I now have my mark on my pulley, mark on my belt, mark on my pulley back there, mark on my belt. And let's go down underneath and I'm going to show you what I've got going on down there. Now back under here, I'm trying to get you a shot of it if I can. This light's kind of bright and harsh, but I'll take a little bit of heat off the light here. All right, so right here you can see my dotted line that we looked at earlier is dead on. That tooth is dead on with my white mark. There's a little detent mark, white mark here. And my timing mark here, that's right here. A little dent right there on this little sprocket is still in line with this right here. So all the timing marks are lined up now. Now I have the idler pulley back in place here. There's a washer behind this. You want to make sure that washer is still behind there when you tighten this new idler pulley back in place. This will put the spacing away from the block at the proper distance for this idler pulley to run. Once we've got all this in place now, as you can see, the belt doesn't have all the tension on it. I can still flex it some here, but all the timing marks are correct. Now up under here is that pin for your dampener. Now I've got both bolts in the dampener. It's tight. As you can see, the belt here has some flex left in it. Now I'm going to pull this pin out. You want to pull it out one quick pull is what I understand. Just like that. Ow. Make sure you don't smash your finger when you do it like I just did. Now as you can see, that piston came up, put tension on the pulley. Now we have tension on our belt, and everything should be good to go. Now we'll start putting our covers back on. Then we'll put our 2 power steering pulley belt back on first, and then our air conditioner alternator belt back on second, and tension those back up. So we're getting close to the finish line. Now that we've got the tension back on the belt, we can go ahead and pull these little paper clips back off of here. And everything looks pretty good from the top side. Now one thing people won't tell you, is that when you pull that water pump off, you're going to make one heck of a mess. Coolant went everywhere. I even tried draining the radiator first, but that doesn't necessarily drain the block. And holy smokes, I used a whole box of rags to soak up the amount of coolant that it didn't drain out. And it went everywhere. So when you do get that water pump off, you can go ahead and wipe it down a little bit, make sure there's no gasket material around there, which if you have the good metal gaskets, all the rubber should come with it, which mine did. I put the new gasket on, new water pump on, tighten it back up. Once I stopped the leaking, I took brake clean and I sprayed brake clean all over everything underneath there. I used a whole can of it, flooded it, made sure I got all that coolant, sticky, nasty mess cleaned off before I put the new belt on, because you don't want all that sticky goo back on touching your belt or making a mess out of things for you. And there's nothing I hate worse than antifreeze all over everything. That's one of my, I'd rather be covered in gear oil than antifreeze, I tell you that. It's just sticky, nasty stuff. Anyway, we're back to, I think we're ready to start putting the top end back together. Next thing we're going to put on is this guy right here. That's ready to go back on, and we'll start putting motor mounts back in place and covers, and we're going to get right after it. Okay, now we've got the belt all back together, our belt back in place, timing marks are lined up, tensioner pin has been pulled. Now it's time to start putting the top end pieces back together. One of the first ones that goes back in is this guy right here. Now this one you got to sneak back down in there because all the bolts won't fit in. Like, you can't set this in place and then put it in. So you basically got to sneak it back down there with the bolts hanging out. Try not to drop any of them. And it's kind of a delicate pain in the butt. Now the other two studs that you got to put in is going to take looks like a Torx E8. That's an external Torx. That fits over these studs, and you can drive these studs in. Once the studs are in, then you can put the nuts on them and tighten the nuts. Now we'll go to the bottom and get the other two. Now that we have the cover piece that holds the two studs and two bolts back over the water pump piece and tightened down, we can go ahead now and put our timing cover back over the upper two pulleys. And see if we can sneak it back down in there like I snuck it out of there. And we'll put our bolts back in that hold the cover on. We're getting to the home stretch. The worst part is going to be tightening up those stupid drive belts for the alternator and the power steering. Okay guys and gals, I've got all the motor mounts back in that we took out at the beginning. The aluminum piece, I cleaned that little pin off so it fits down in there good. We got all our covers back on. We got everything up here bolted, tightened down. I went down below, put the belts back on, tightened up the belts you got your one belt for the power steering, and you got your air conditioner alternator belt up front here. That all seems to be in good shape, hooked up and running good, and we're idling it now. I'm just trying to bring it up to temp to see if I can burp any of the excess air that might be in the system after I put a gallon of antifreeze back in. Well, I think we got to take it for a test spin now. Seems to be running pretty good. Alrighty folks, there you have it. I know I didn't capture a lot of detail. I captured as much as I could. I tried to highlight the most important things when doing your timing belt. A couple of things I want to follow up on at the end of this video. I've now had the car in operation for a week. You do want to burp that radiator system. You want to make sure there's no air trapped in your block or in your coolant system. It will cause your car to overheat. So when you first start this up and you think you've got it full, I put almost a full gallon in, and then I noticed the temperature starting to climb past halfway. I didn't have all the air burped out of the system. I put in, once I got it burped out, which is basically running it with the radiator cap off, squeezing your upper radiator hose, getting some of that excess air out of it, and then keep topping it off your coolant until I got another half gallon in there. It took a gallon and a half to fill it back up. So there's no reason why every car that you do like this shouldn't take a gallon and a half to fill it back up if you do exactly what I did. So if you can only get a gallon in there, you don't have enough in. The other thing I wanted to make a note of is listen to your belts. You know, these things don't have a constant tensioner on the belts that drive the power steering pump and the alternator and air conditioner compressor. I hate that it doesn't have that, because I like all the other modern serpentine belts that have the one tensioner. It tightens everything up. That's really nice. It's pretty maintenance free. Well, these are a pain in the butt to get at. It takes some crawling around to get the doggone things tensioned up. Well, I had a belt after about 200 miles. When you started up cold, it had a little chirp, and you could hear the compressor kick on, and it caused the belt to chirp a little bit. So it needed to be tightened up a little bit. I didn't want to over tighten them, because if you over tighten them, you can create a condition that would cause excess wear and tear on your bearings, and I didn't want to do that. So this morning I rolled it back up on my ramps, pull that front cover down. There's a cover about, I don't know, it's probably 4.5 feet wide. That's about this thick, front to back, about this thick, front to back. You take a handful of screws out, that comes down. It actually gains you better access to that tensioner adjustment on the alternator. So I did that, gave it a few more turns, started it up, no chirp, we're good to go for a while. But that's one of the things you want to make sure you pay attention to. These are key important things to get a lot of life out of your belts and out of your equipment, period. Well, we had a good time. I'd like to say I had a good time. It was a royal tedious pain in the butt. It took me, like I said, 5.5 hours total to get that job done. Actually, the timer said 6. I took a half hour off just for cleaning up all the coolant I spilt. But if you want to count that in the job, fine, 6 hours. I could also subtract a half hour of just messing around with the camera, trying to get some of these shots for you. But anyway, 5 to 6 hours to get that job completely done. I'm not going to do it again until I hit 50,000 miles. There was one bearing. I already tossed it. The idler that has the tensioner on it, that bearing was actually starting to make a little noise, and it didn't quite have 50,000 miles on it. So I kind of took it upon myself to say that I'm going to do this belt every 50,000 miles. And the reason I say that is it's cheap insurance to keep from messing up your engine. You don't want to have a bearing seize up on you. Take your belt out, and it can happen. That bearing can seize up so fast. And then all of a sudden it's burning up your belt breaks, engine collides with itself on the internally, and you've just junked out your motor. On a motor that should comfortably go 300,000 miles if you do all the proper maintenance on it. So that's why I decided I'm going to do that. The belt at 50,000 miles looked fantastic. It didn't have any unusual wear on it. It didn't have any cracking or anything like that. It looked great. So that's why 5 years or 50,000 miles, that's what this guy's going to do on his RX 330. You guys do what you want to do. This is just what Michael's going to do. Okay? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you get out there and have some fun. I hope you keep your tires on the road for many, many miles. And we'll be right back here with another outboard video before you can snap your finger, clip your heels together, and say there's no place like Michael's Backyard Marina. You guys get out there and have some fun. If it ain't broke, fix it till it is. I'm out. Because he's got that boom, 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 boom.